Yo, what up? It's me, Victor D. Bradley here. And, this is crazy. We've got OP-05 reveals already. OP-04's only just come out and we're already starting reveal season. These Japanese magazines are just crazy at doing hype stuff. Because we had this image leak for 3 new leaders that are coming. We got Sabo, Sakazuki, and Emeru coming, which is crazy. Across the river, we've only just gotten started with OP-03, and already I have 2 sets worth of things to look forward to, which is a bit of a shame. When you're playing with the English cards, and you are a set behind, that you don't really get that time to play around with things unless you're playing a set ahead on the sim, which is good and bad. It's good that you get to play. It's good that we still get to play stuff if we want to play online on the sim, but it's bad that metas come a little bit pre-solved for us. But regardless, we can still look at this new stuff and speculate, and it's a lot of fun. So I thought why not just go through a couple of things. Just check out these leaders and talk a little bit about some of their strengths and weaknesses. We'll start with Sakazuki, because that's the first one in front of me. So what we have here is Sakazuki. He's a navy blue-black leader. He's got 5,000 power. His special trait, OP-05, right? Pretty cool so far. Now, this is a 4-life leader, and his whole gimmick is quite simply, activate main once per turn. You may discard 1 card from your hand, draw a card. And when you attack, give one of your opponent's characters -1 cost. Cool, pretty simple. It's a card like this, leader like this. Obviously, it's 4-life leader, but it has a really strong color combination, in my opinion. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the effect first. So, it's simple, and I think it's really good. So, it's good value. You can unbrick your hand at any time, and that's something that's really important in a game like One Piece, is not having bricks. Your hand is so important. Your hand is the only real way you can defend yourself in this game. Even playing blockers, getting blockers out, like the stuff comes from your hand, and playing a blocker is deciding that spending 2 Don to defend myself 1 time, but giving them the opportunity to remove it, is more valuable than holding a counter in your hand, right? But one of the reasons cards like events in One Piece, especially activate main events, are so bad is that they're bricks, and they give you no defensive value. So when you play this game, your hand has to be very strong defensively a lot of the time. So this is why any card that I pick up or that gets revealed and it doesn't have counter power attached to it, immediately in my mind, this has to be so strong a card that every single time that you see it, it should be played. It has to be played, right? There cannot be a situation in which you pick up this card and go, oh, terrible draw. Once you start cutting cards like this down to like 2 ofs, 3 ofs, right? And there's no real way to like cheat these things out. Sometimes they are just bricks. I think you got a real trouble card on your hand. It has to have a really strong effect. Kind of like Okiku. Okiku's got a really strong effect. It's only 3 cost, so it can always be played on turn 2, whereas something that's a 4 cost card, like there's that Big Daddy card, who has a pretty good effect, like stand me at the end of the turn or whatever it is, but he's a 4 cost and he has no counter power, right? A card like this cannot be played on turn 2 if you're going first, so you have to play this card on turn 3, and then at turn 3, is it too late? Is it lost a lot of its value, right? This is the kind of decision making that comes between running cards that have no counter power, right? Now, we can supplement this in some colors, right? So blue has a lot of effects that are like Kaya, play Kaya, draw 2, discard 2, attack with Mihawk, draw 2, discard 2. Soga King has draw 2, discard 2, right? Yellow also has a little bit of access to this through Shirahoshi, and purple obviously has Queen and Khalifa now as well, right? So cards like this can supplement having these bricks in your hand, where in these bad situations you can get rid of them, but it requires a whole nother card. It always requires another card in your hand to be able to do this sort of thing. And then there comes a decision making in your deck building process. How many? Now, a card like Sakazuki, right? So a card like Sakazuki that allows you to just discard these things and draw a whole new card once a turn, whenever you want. So you're looking at a matchup, it's a bad card in the matchup, it can be any other card in your deck now, right? You can just run straight 4-ofs. Now, of course, there's still like, oh no, I picked up another card with no counter power, right? Ooh, that was bad. But you might pick up like something that's actually playable here, because this doesn't cost you any Don. Like if this was activate main, 2 Don, discard a card, draw a new card, like, that's rough, okay, but whatever. Anyway, my point really is you have the ability to remove bricks from your hand, and that's a really powerful tool in a game like this. He's got -1 on attack, right? And it's free as well. It's a free -1 on attack. It doesn't cost you a Don to minus anyone or anything like that. Sadly, it isn't like an activate main effect. It is an on-attack effect. So this can impact how you order your attacks. Obviously, ordering your attacks is pretty important if there are KO unit effects and things like that, and you need to swing with your leader first. You know, this can add a little bit of complication to how you do that. So giving it an activate main versus an on-attack is, in some situations, quite relevant. It's also relevant into something like a 10-cost Ophi that can keep your guy rested for the turn, right? So, you know, there are ways to prevent you from activating this, but they're not the most reliable. So an on-attack, it's fine. It's good. We're not complaining about this. The good part about having an effect like this, not just for black, it's also in blue. It's extremely relevant to blue's more control-based game plan, where we can bounce dudes to bottom, bounce dudes back to hand. This adds a lot of value in that regard. Now, naturally, blue's been helped out a lot in set 4 with access to red rock. One of blue's biggest problems is that the only way it could deal with cards of cost greater than 7 is to punch them. One of the most maddening things playing blue is playing against like the taunt kid that forces you to attack it. It's really tough because you can bounce like a 7-drop kid to bottom of deck with Mihawk, but then your only option to deal with this other thing is to run it in, and you know green has access to like 1-drop blockers and things like that. But even regardless of that, when we put big units on the board and we're playing blue, we're having a real hard time. So having access to something like Red Rock has really given us a lot of help in that regard anyway, but then also access to 3,000 worlds to be able to deal with 5-cost units quite effectively without having to bouncing it back with Dofi's never felt great, right? But being able to bounce it back to bottom of deck with 3,000 worlds has been very helpful for a color like blue. So having this leader being able to on-attack -1, this adds a lot of value. Obviously for things like, you know, Mihawk can bounce an 8 now back to bottom, or this is free, right? It doesn't cost you anything, so you can use it with Kaido's effect. You can make a 4 a 3, or you can make a 3 a 4, or a 7 an 8, right? One or the other, and then Kaido can now bounce a little bit more. He's got a little bit more options in the bouncing department, right? Dofi, right? Those are some pretty obvious ones. Obviously, I think 3,000 worlds gets the most value out of this. Being able to go from a 4-cost bounce of 5 to a 4-cost bounce of 6, I think is extremely relevant for blue, and very strong. And if you just want to compare mana to mana, if he has 6 mana, plays a dude for 6 mana, and then I have 6 mana, I bounce a dude for 4 mana, I can still attach 2 swing, or I can still play a blocker or anything like that. I have a little bit more options in what I can do in a turn by only spending 4 versus him spending 6 and then losing that whole turn. 6 is a big commitment for any card, alright? Let alone 8 or 9 or 10, right? 6 is still a very big commitment for a card. And so being able to bounce a 6 cost, alright, for 4 mana, and no additional resources, I think we're so happy, right? A lot of problem that black has on its own is that black costs you multiple cards to remove stuff, right? You gotta play a guy, reduce the cost, play another guy who makes you discard a card, and then you can KO a dude. You've had to do this whole elaborate 3-card combo. You've lost 3 resources to remove one guy. You've lost these resources and then they just play another guy the following turn. But being in blue, I think being in blue and black is a great color combination. It just gives you more range and to be able to deal with more things and way more cheaply. So we don't have to spec into a lot of black's expensive KO tools. I mean, something like the Sakazuki that comes out and blows up a 5 cost or whatever. Now it can blow up something bigger. I think there's a lot of value in something like that. But I think obviously a lot more of the value is more in the blue stuff, in my opinion. But, you know, there's options both ways. We can spec into a lot of the really strong black tools, even some of the strong black defensive tools. But this, of course, this is a 4-life leader. Something else I want to touch on is a 4-life leader. We're often quite afraid of 4-life leaders. I think blue is one of the best colors you can be in as a 4-life leader. Blue has a lot of really strong defensive tools, and part of blue's tools being so strong, we talk about things like Love Beam, or the Boa Hancock 4-drop that draws when you have 5 or less, and even like access to 1-cost blockers out of the starter deck. Right? So black obviously makes you discard a lot of tools to be able to use its KO effects. You can easily refill with Love and Boa Hancock. There are a lot of ways for blue to be able to do this, even if you want to spec into Pilafs and just draw 2 cards, pop it off the top with a trigger, you know. Blue has a lot of options to supplement a lot of that card draw issue that black has in that navy stuff. Right? But then also these, again, your defense is your hand, right? The size of your hand really dictates your defense, and blue's really good at staying on relatively low hand size while still being able to maintain itself, right? So it's not often at threat of something like Isho in a black mirror or something like that. Yeah. So I think this is a good leader. I think this leader adds a lot of excitement, a lot of value, especially for the type of game plans that I like to play. I've never been really big on black stuff. I was really into Zephyr pretty early on set 2. But he fell off super hard with that really bad red matchup. This could be an opportunity to bring me back over to black, because I'm a pretty committed blue and purple kind of guy, you know what I mean? So next up is Sabo. So finally get a Sabo leader, right? So Sabo's a red-black leader for 5k, and this is another 4-life leader. So his effect is, for 1 Don attached, on your opponent's turn, once per turn, if one of your characters with 5,000 power or more were to be KO'd, you can instead give that character -1 for the turn. And you can only ever activate this once on your opponent's turn. So the whole gimmick here being that Sabo gives you a pretty cheap, effective way to be able to protect your units. Which, for units that have 5,000 or more power, right? So 5, 6, 7, etc. I'm not really a red-black guy, so I probably have a bit of a harder time seeing the value in this. I would say on the surface that red probably has a much harder time defending a lot of its characters. So one, being in black, it has access to things like Borsellino. And so Borsellino can take a couple of pretty good blocks to protect for red. My worry, of course, being that this is like a GARP situation where we just don't really put together a really cohesive couple of colors. Obviously, red is a lot about character power, and black is a lot about red is a lot about opponent's character power, and black is a lot about opponent's character cost. So they're not a couple effects that really meld too well. Thankfully, this is a leader that doesn't revolve too much around utilizing the strengths of red or the strengths of black. I think this is a little bit of a generic effect where you can just go in and run red power cards, black power cards, and then just defend your big units. Where something like this I think holds the most value is if you play like a 7,000 power unit, right? And so your opponent's got to juice up to fight this thing. And so they juice up to this guy, they fight this guy, and then you just -1k on this dude, and then they have to juice up another guy and swing with another guy, right? So just to get to 7 on a leader, that's a 2 Don commitment. If they have another 5k, that's another 2 Don commitment. It's 4 Don. It's 4 Don. Well, I mean, it's -1, so they would probably juice more. It just protects your dudes. It gives you another option to protect your dudes, which I think is a very strong effect. And it really doesn't cost you much at all. Having 1 Don attached, a lot of the time we like to swing for 2 Don on our leaders or 1 Don on our leaders. Just force your opponent to keep discarding a little bit extra every time. So I don't think something like this is really expensive at all. And then even if your opponent has to swing a unit twice to kill it, I feel like we're happy. I feel like, you know, a lot of the times if I block with a 6k against a 5 and then they swing it again and they're like, haha, I killed your guy. A lot of the time I look at it like, well, it took you 2 swings to kill my guy and it didn't really cost me anything. I effectively got a free block in a sense. So, I don't know, your bigger units, even your 5s, take a couple hits to kill them. It gives you another option to defend them. I just worry that an effect like this, while strong, is in a bad color combination. I don't have a lot of respect for the red-black color combination. And I think Garp's results kind of show for that. The other problem I think is that by being a dual health leader, or by being a dual color leader, it has 4 health. And 4 health is very hard to defend, and I think red especially has a hard time defending that kind of health. My experience with black is that while black has some decent options, it doesn't have great counters. So black's best defensive tool is like Borsalino. So I don't know. I think this leader. I think red blacks. You know, they die by their combination. It's just not a great combination. But hopefully, an effect like this is enough to get such a popular character over the line. You know. Oh, so last one. We're going to talk about Enlu. So we have a yellow leader, 5,000, obviously. So this guy has 4 life. I think he's the first leader of his kind that is mono and only has 4 life. He's Sky Island. And this guy's whole gimmick is on your opponent's turn, and once per turn, when your life hits 0, you can add the top card of your deck to your life, but then you have to discard 1 from your hand. So you pick up a life, trigger effect, discard 1. Alright, put 1 card on top. So, I feel like there's a lot. It's a very simple effect, but I think there is a lot to think about in building a deck around an effect like this. So, or your decision making in whether or not you would run this leader, right? Not so much like how you would build a deck around this guy. I'll explain why about that in a second. So I think the best way is to, let's first weigh up pros and cons of this guy. So a couple pros. So you discard 1 to use this effect. However, you are drawing 1 off the top of your life. So it's a net loss of 0 resources. So it actually doesn't really cost you anything. You don't go down in anything in order to use this. You still have 1 life. And if you started with 5 cards, then you still have 5 cards at the end of it, right? Pick up 1, put 1 down, put 1 back on your life. Yeah? Cool. So, where's the advantage in something like that? Over just comboing out of it. So if you combo out of it, if you use counter to get out of it, it's going to cost you cards to get out of it. Now, where this becomes extremely valuable is if your opponent is swinging you big, like throwing these big swings at you, like this 8k unit comes swinging in at you, you don't have to counter out of it, right? It's pretty cheap to, like, if someone swings you 5, you just drop 1. Swing 5, drop 1, right? But you can save this effect for, like, a big swing. Guy swings you with a 10k, I'll just take the hit, discard 1, put 1 on top, right? Cool, no problem. That's where I think an effect like this is really getting value. It's already not bad value, because you're effectively drawing a card, discarding 1, in order to use this effect, right? It's the same as discard 1, draw 1. Exactly the same, right? So that's pretty good, all right? But let's think about where this leader ain't so good, in my opinion. So a leader like this, first of all, has no offensive threat. All right. Now, he doesn't get any bonuses on his own turn. He doesn't get any real bonuses from being aggressive. And you might say, like, oh, you know, a character like Doflamingo, right? Who the dual color one in set 4 that is playing with film cards right now. You would say, like, oh, a guy like that doesn't have an offensive value, right? Because his effect triggers at the end of the turn. It just keeps him 2 resources up to defend himself, right? But where I would tell you that that is an offensive threat is that you can spend all your Don. You have 10 Don, you can spend 10 Don and still be able to protect yourself. So you can be more aggressive in your plays while still having resources effectively for free to be able to defend yourself. You don't really get that you don't really get that with an effect like this, unless there's something that I'm not thinking about. You don't have that. You only have an effect that will trigger at a very specific circumstance in the game that gives you a little bit more, that gives you more defense than what a normal leader would have. All right, but on that note, he has 4 life, right? So you have to weigh up when you're picking a leader like this, is it better just to have 5 life, right? Because we have 2 other options. All right, well, we technically have 3 other options in yellow for mono leaders that have 5 life, right? We have a more synergistic option, and then we have more general options that we can go for, right? So to get the most out of this effect, you need to use it at least twice every game. If you can't use this effect twice in a game, then then honestly, you're better off just playing Katakuri, a 5 life leader with a strong offensive threat, right? But if you're using this effect 2-3 times a game, all right, which means you have to survive from 0 life 3 times in a game, 2 times in a game to see some real value here, right? And then you have to decide if that defensive value is worth more than playing more offensive options, right? Now this is another con, I guess. It's a funny con, but yellow has its own counter to this, because this is enemy turn only. If you punch your opponent and they flip over Soul Pocus, right? They're playing Big Mom or something. They flip over Soul Pocus, and you choose to trash your own life. It's a choice, right? Then you can't actually activate this effect. You would need to be able to heal yourself and then do it again. I think that's really funny. Now on all that, so I wouldn't. So you probably will see something like this played a lot with the 9-drop Yamato, that will come in and heal you 1, or like KO a guy, but mostly it's healing you 1. It's probably going to be very strong with an option like that. I wouldn't call it a pro or a con to have access to a card like this, because all yellow leaders have access to a card like this. It's not a unique bonus of this leader that you get access to a 9-drop that heals you 1. But it is also a drawback of this leader that he can't use 10-cost Big Mom. He doesn't have the Big Mom tag, so he doesn't get access to that late game threat with a fucking 2 health swing attached to it, right? So your real decision-making power, knowing your pros and cons now, is this guy... So I'll probably explain this a few times if I continue to make videos about this game, but in this game we have, and I'm sure a lot of games as well, we have generic leaders and high synergy leaders, all right? So a high synergy leader in yellow and a low synergy leader in yellow would be something like Katakuri and Big Mom, right? So Big Mom, and I specifically mean this Big Mom that comes in starter deck 3. This Big Mom is a high synergistic effect, right? Because you're specifically building a deck to put the right triggers that you want on top of your life. So you draw them, and then you have to put them on your life, specifically stack your life, so that you can turn over the effects that you want to happen at the right times. That's high synergy. That's a build around effect. You need to build around that effect in order to get the most out of this leader. You can't just put in generically strong yellow cards and expect to do really well. right? Because you might not have the right triggers that you need at the right times in order to protect yourself or offer an offensive value, right? Whereas someone like Katakuri, Katakuri is just attach one Don, you get a bonus 1k. You do get to look at the top card you get to look at a top card of yours or your opponent, but a lot of the time you're using this to check what your opponent's going to get and decide, can I give it to him now or should I give it to him later, right? That's your decision-making power on Katakuri. There's not a lot of build-around that goes on with something like that. It's just a generically strong effect. And so when you build a leader that's quite generic, you can just literally, if you wanted to, you could just take that leader, put all the strong cards from that color in and send it. And just send it. And just see how it goes. So this, in my opinion, is not a build around leader, because I don't think there's really a specific way you can build around this leader unless yellow gets an effect that allows you to scry your top card and set your deck, right? If this leader allowed you a way, if yellow allowed you a way to set the top cards of your deck, then we have a lot of potential for we have a lot of potential here for yellow stacking your triggers again in a different way. The question then would become, is this more valuable than the yellow-black Big Mom? Because the yellow-black Big Mom, it's top card of your deck, right? Oh, I should really know these things before I start talking about them. But OP-03, that's starter deck 3. OP-03, we get the black-yellow Big Mom, and place one card from the top of your deck at the top of your opponent's life. Now, if we get that effect for yellow, the decision now becomes, is this Big Mom better than this Eneru? They're both 4 life, but this Big Mom has access to another color, right? Has access to black. Now, I can't think of any like really useful black triggers off the top of my head that you would want to stack your deck and then, you know, spend 4 ton to put a card on top of your deck. This is where the trade-off comes, all right? So I think even in the best case scenario for an NL like this, where it gets an effect where it can look at what the next couple cards are coming and then stack them as he wants, I think he's still competing. He is still competing for his slot with other leaders in his own color, which is going to be a big struggle for a guy like this. So yeah, as a generic leader, and I think he's a generic leader at this stage, until possibly some more synergistic options come later down the track for him, or even if there are Sky Island cards coming. That's another thing we have to keep in mind about these leaders, is that they're going to have support, I assume. There's going to be, like, God's Knights and things like that that are coming. Alright, so we might even have God's Knights effect. I don't know if they're called God's Knights, but we might have priest effects where they let you look, if your leader is specifically NL, then you get to look at the top few cards of your deck. Then we have a real contest, right? Now there's actually some serious value over this guy as a synergistic leader in yellow, right? And then he starts competing with Big Mom's slot, right? Of course, he has access to a whole host of different cards, but as a synergistic control-based leader, we have more options in this guy. Right? But anyway, right now, as we look at him now, very generic, right? So, my question is, why would we use this guy over the generic options that we would already have? Which is Katakuri, who gets the +1, and Yamato, who gets +1 on defense, right? So, is the defense of having 1 less life, but the ability to heal yourself every time you're about to die, more valuable than being able to swing harder on your own turn and generate more of a lead that way? But then also, Katakuri, keep in mind, has access to the really powerful Big Mom Bomb at the end of the games. We can self-heal, right? He can self-heal and force your opponent to trash one, right? But then does Yamato have more value by having an extra 1k attached from 2 life, and then still being able to heal herself with the 9-drop Yamato, which she also has, which all of yellow has access to. This is kind of the decision-making power that we have when we introduce cards like this to decide what is going to be more effective. And until we see some really powerful build-around tools for Anaru, for some more Skypiea-based stuff, some more interesting Skypiea-based cards, I think right now, there isn't a lot of value in Anaru over some of the leader options we already have in yellow. But he will get support, and he will live and die by his support, I think. Anyway, that's all. 3 leaders, 3 new leaders, a lot of fun stuff. OP-05 is already on the horizon. It's crazy. But if you're like me, you're in an English-speaking country, and you only play... We're in set 3. We're looking at cards that are 2 sets ahead. It's crazy. Anyway, we'll be seeing ya. I'm gonna go take a shit.